Welcome to Xi Jinping Briefing. The content of the briefing includes investing themes to watch in 2024, Magnificent 7, small caps, quick shifts, and more. Update 1. Top diplomats of China, Japan, South Korea seek to boost three-way ties. How geopolitics caught up with Canada. Still suffocated, mourning China's zero-COVID protests a year on. Beijing rebukes Washington after warning off U.S. warship in South China Sea. Investing themes to watch in 2024, Magnificent 7, small caps, quick shifts, and more. Yahoo! Update 1. Top diplomats of China, Japan, South Korea seek to boost three-way ties. Yahoo! Foreign ministers from China, Japan, and South Korea met in Busan on November 28, with the aim of restoring cooperation and preparing for a summit of the three countries' leaders. The three nations had agreed to hold annual summits from 2008, but this was interrupted by two-way rows and the COVID-19 pandemic. The foreign ministers last met in 2019. The ministers discussed North Korean issues, including people-to-people exchanges, climate change, and trade and economy. They also discussed ensuring the summit of the three leaders was held as soon as possible. How geopolitics caught up with Canada. Financial Times. Canada's long-held view of itself as a fireproof house is being challenged as the country finds itself entangled in foreign policy dilemmas with India and China. Canada has accused China of interfering in its domestic politics and criticized the Chinese military for flying dangerously close to its aircraft. It has also accused India of being involved in the fatal shooting of a Canadian Sikh. The country is grappling with how to conduct a foreign policy that aligns with its political identity while authoritarian governments gain influence and economic power shifts to Asia. The changing global landscape has led Canada to rely on two principles: defending its sovereignty and employing pragmatic diplomacy to engage with nations with different perspectives to prevent conflicts. Canada is increasing its presence in the Indo-Pacific and boosting its diplomatic and military presence in the region. It is also considering engagement with China and India to stabilize relations. While Canada is taking a firm stance against China's actions, it is also mindful of the need for constructive dialogue. However, the opposition Conservative Party is pressuring Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to be tough on China, which may limit his ability to engage in dialogue. Still suffocated, mourning China's zero-COVID protests a year on. Japan Times. Last year, protests broke out in Shanghai calling for an end to zero-COVID measures and even the toppling of the ruling Communist Party and its leader Xi Jinping. 1 year later, there is a subtly increased police presence on main junctions in Shanghai, but otherwise, there is no visible sign of the protests. However, for those involved in the demonstrations, the memory of the events remains. Beijing rebukes Washington after warning off U.S. warship in South China Sea. South China Morning Post. China has accused the U.S. of being the biggest disruptor of peace in the South China Sea after a U.S. warship sailed near disputed islands. The Chinese military said it warned off the U.S. destroyer, which it said had illegally entered its territorial waters near the Paracel Islands. The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet said the operation was conducted under international law and demonstrated that the U.S. would operate wherever international law allows. The incident comes as the U.S. and the Philippines wrap up 3 days of joint patrols near Taiwan. Chinese travel firms prepare for return of foreign tourists as outlook improves. South China Morning Post. Chinese travel agencies are stepping up marketing efforts to attract overseas tourists to China, taking advantage of the warming relationship between the U.S. and China following a recent meeting between the two countries' presidents. Trip.com Group, China's largest online travel firm, has pledged to invest in areas such as marketing and technology over the next 3 years to bolster its inbound travel business. The recovery of inbound tourism will help strengthen China's fragile economy, which has suffered from the COVID-19 pandemic and worsening relations with Western countries. The hired gun influencers who are ready to stand up for China. The Sydney Morning Herald. Chinese state-backed influencer operations are targeting foreigners to manage public opinion at home and abroad, according to research conducted by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, ASPI. The study found that the Chinese government is becoming more sophisticated in using influencers to shape narratives and maintain credibility within the confines of the Great Firewall. These influencers are used to ward off domestic criticism and criticize international responses to issues such as human rights disputes and COVID-19. The Chinese government is also investing in prizes and training programs to develop the next generation of influencers. Some argue that China's use of Western influencers is clunky and ineffective, but others believe it is a sign of desperation. The research found that Chinese influencer studios are reaching beyond social media and into traditional broadcast networks, with productions airing on major U.S. networks such as National Geographic and the Discovery Channel. However, there are doubts about the effectiveness of these efforts. Some argue that China's outreach programs are failing to turn the tide of global public opinion and that the use of Western influencers is poorly managed. Others believe that the Chinese government's attempts at influencing are sloppy and may not be effective in the long term. The research conducted by ASPI highlights the growing influence and sophistication of China's influencer operations. These operations are being used to shape narratives, control public opinion, and promote China's image abroad. However, there are doubts about the effectiveness of these efforts and concerns about the ethics of using influencers to promote state narratives. As China's influence continues to grow, it will be important to monitor the impact of these influencer operations and consider their implications for public opinion and international relations. Is Philippines' alliance building to counter China a major naval war risk? South China Morning Post. China's gray zone activities in the South China Sea, particularly around the Second Thomas Shoal, could lead to a further escalation of tensions in the region. These activities, which involve coercive actions by China against the Philippines, are seen as a way for China to assert its territorial claims without triggering a military conflict. However, analysts warn that the lack of communication and dialogue between the two countries increases the risk of accidents and miscalculations. The Philippines has sought support from allies such as the US, Japan, and Australia, who have pledged to come to its aid in case of an attack. The recent clashes between China and the Philippines have their roots in 1999 when the Philippines grounded a ship on the Second Thomas Shoal to prevent Chinese encroachment. Since then, Chinese Coast Guard and militia vessels have been blocking resupply missions to the ship, using tactics such as blinding lasers and water cannons. Despite these actions, the Philippines has continued its resupply missions, with the support of its allies. The U.S., in particular, has reaffirmed its commitment to stand by the Philippines under the Mutual Defense Treaty. China has been pressuring the Philippines to remove the ship from the shoal, but Manila has refused to concede to China's demands. Both countries are trying to avoid violence and a major naval war, but the risk of miscalculations remains. The Philippines has sought to internationalize the dispute by getting support from its allies, while China argues that the dispute should be resolved bilaterally. The U.S. plays a key role in supporting the Philippines and helping it build its military deterrent capabilities. However, questions have been raised about American overreach and whether its support for the Philippines could waver given the multiple crises it faces in the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.